mic feedback. We're going to have okay, that's better. All right, so welcome everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Michael. I'm one of the social workers here at the Senior Center. I'll be moderating tonight. Want to thank all of the candidates for being here. Ben Kaufman's here to talk to us about the ballot questions. Want to thank Brookline Can and the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this event. Both our membership organizations, Brookline Can, dedicated to improving things for older adults here in town, League of Women Voters, nonpartisan and fostering free, fair elections, the democratic process. Brookline Can and the League have information on the table right back there, so definitely encourage you all to check that out if you are not familiar with one or the other. This is the election forum. Elections on May 2nd, as I'm sure you all know. That is when you will be able to vote. You can also vote early, and Ben can talk about that, which is great. Big is here live streaming the event, so it'll be on local access cable. It's available online. And it'll be posted afterwards if you would like to go and relive the experience. I'm sure you'll all want to do that. Just want to always mention at the outset of something like this, there's going to be a group of candidates that come through. I'm up here, and the group of candidates and I are not fully representative of the Brookline community, which is made up of people of all types. Just always want to acknowledge that at the outset of any kind of political event like this. It's a forum with limited time. We have 2 hours and a lot that we want to get to, so please hold any applause until the end of the forum so that we can keep things rolling. So we're going to start off, we're going to hear from the school committee candidates who are here. They're just going to just introduce themselves, give you 2 minutes on why they're running for school committee, give you a chance to get to know them just a little bit. So in any order you guys want to come up is fine.
Good afternoon, everyone. My fellow wise, experienced people here. It was fun coming here. I saw everybody coming from all directions walking because it's such a beautiful day. My name is Suzanne Fetterspiel. I am running for re-election for a school committee. I have served 2 terms, which means 6 years. To give you a little background, I have lived in Brookline since '85, so it's a number of years. I have 2 grown children. They went to Pierce, and then they went to BHS. And what else do I want to say? I want to say that I'm an educator by training, so I've had many jobs as an educator. I started off as a speech-language pathologist, went into special ed, did some work around casework. They call them ETFs. Educational team facilitators, and then I went on to be a building administrator. I did all that in Boston, and I am now retired, and I say retirement is working without pay. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm spending a lot of time on school committee, which I really love, and I also am doing tutoring in Boston for literacy for some 3rd graders, and I am a special ed advocate for a student in Boston as well. So just to give you a background, I know a lot about education. That's really my passion. And I serve on the curriculum subcommittee, finance subcommittee, and negotiations subcommittee of the school committee. So I'm running unopposed. There are 3 people. Oh my goodness, okay, 30 seconds. So I am running unopposed. There are 3 people running for 3 slots. I would like to put a plug in for question 1. We absolutely support it. I know we won't have time to debate it. And I put a plug in for question 2 on the override. It's really important to our schools that we keep our schools excellent and support our superintendent. I think Dr. Guerillery's fabulous. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks to Matt Weiss, who is here, keeping time for us as well. So, he'll be enforcing on the candidates, and I'll be backing him up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia Linas. That's Natalia, Natalia. And I'm running for the one-year seat on school committee. That seat is a contested race, and I hope that in 2 minutes, I can persuade you as to why you should vote for me. I currently serve as executive director of a center at Harvard on health and human rights. I oversee a team of about 20 people, the budgets, the operations for that team. I'm also a mom of 3 kids at Pierce. So you might question, like, why are you running? You know, those are 2 pretty big jobs. But as a parent of 3 kids, I have witnessed how difficult COVID was for all of us, as parents, educators, school committee, and I'm a public health expert. I hope to bring that expertise to the crisis that we're currently facing, which is mental health, a mental health crisis both for our kids, but also for our staff. And I'm also really committed to inclusion and equity. A lot of my work at Harvard is around structural racism, around how do we have better metrics. And I'm someone who knows numbers. I'm an epidemiologist, but I'm also someone who really listens well. I grew up in Greece. I speak Greek fluently, and I know that our community has a lot of international folks. So I hope to be an ear to those families who may be in Brookline short-term or long-term, but be a little confused about our education system. I hope to bring that perspective of inclusion to our community. And finally, I'm a big climate supporter. I am part of Mothers Out Front here in Brookline. I'm also on the board of the Environmental League of Massachusetts, and a lot of my work at the UN, I spent 10 years at the UN, was on climate and health. And in that sense, I am committed to ensuring that our practices in our schools, whether it's composting or our buildings or our curriculum, has a climate and sustainability lens. So with that, I'm here to serve. I chose Brookline to make it my home because of the great schools, and I'm here to do the work that it takes so that we continue to have great schools. Thank you.
So hi everyone, I'm Christopher Muddy. I'm originally from Winooski, Vermont. I went to I had public education there from K to 12. I then went on to Middlebury College, also in Vermont. And I've been in Boston for about 12 years. I've been in Brookline since 2014. So I have 2 kids, one on the way, and my kindergartner goes to the Ridley School. It is a fantastic environment for a kid to learn. And the kids at Pierce deserve that too. So I'm voting for yes on 1 to make sure that the Pierce School gets rebuilt so the kids there have a great environment. I'm also voting yes on 2, which is the override, to ensure that we can operate the schools without the cuts that the school committee has already proposed if the override does not pass. So I'm voting yes on 1, yes on 2, and I'm running for school committee because I want to bring my experience having a young kid in the system to the school committee to ensure that we can really fight for pre-K, universal pre-K here in Brookline. If Springfield can do it, if Boston can do it, I think Brookline can do it too. And so that's why I'm running for school committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And is Mariah was the other one who's maybe going to be here? No? Okay. Anyone else running for a townwide office, housing, library trustees who wants to just come up, say hi, tell us your name? Not have 2 minutes, but just want to give you a chance to say hi so people know your face.
Hi, my name is John Margolis. I've been a library trustee since 2005. What? You got it?
Yeah, hold the mic to your mouth.
Okay. I've been a trustee since 2005, and I'm going into the ring one more time. I just want to urge you all to use the library. If you use it more. Most of my reading these days is done by downloading books from our online collection. I read them on an iPad. It's great. I actually like it better than books, I hate to say. We also have a library of tools that you can look at. There's lots of stuff there.
John,
look around.
We're going to leave it there. Thanks, though. Appreciate you being here.
I'm Karen Livingston. I'm a current trustee, and does everyone know we have a new library director in town? Should love to meet everyone. So feel free to come to the library and see all the things that John has told you about, and meet our director.
Thank you very much.
Hi there, I'm Sue Cohen. I'm running for re-election to the Brookline Housing Authority. I'm an incumbent commissioner. I think I bring some unique background to the job of commissioner, as I've been a public housing lawyer for over 3 decades, and I am currently general counsel of Cambridge Housing Authority. I've lived in Brookline for 41 years. I have 2 adult children and 3 grandchildren. I think we've accomplished a lot. While I've been on the board, we hired a fantastic new director. We've rehabilitated fully 2 senior buildings. We're doing 2 more, and we have expanded our services to the elderly and to our families. We're bringing in Hebrew Senior Life to provide support services to the elderly, and we're really looking forward to being able to keep on that path. So I think I have something unique to bring to the board, and I'd ask you to give me your vote so that I could continue that work that we've been so successful at for the last 5 years.
Thank you. And you know, all these positions are important, and glad you all are running and serving the community in those positions. And one more person here to come and say hi for townwide office. And just acknowledge that, you know, we have limited time. We're going to focus on the select board mainly, but one more person for the townwide office.
Say that again?
Which office are you in?
Housing Authority.
Okay. Yeah, just say hi.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Richardson. I'm out of breath. I apologize for being late. I couldn't find parking and a whole host of other things. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a chance to say hi. Thanks for being here, Kimberly. And so now we're going to hear from Ben Kaufman. He's going to talk to us for a few minutes about the ballot questions, just explain how the voting process is going to work and what is on there. So Ben, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for having me. I'm Ben Kaufman. I'm the town clerk. I want to give a thank you to the League, to Brookline Can, to the Senior Center for all the work that you do to get out information about the elections that we have coming up. So this election has a lot on the ballot. For those of you who are interested, on the back table, there are actually sample ballots for each precinct. So feel free to grab one if you'd like. They're also available online if you go to the town clerk's website. What you'll see at the top of the ballot are the various offices that we have. You'll hear from the candidates. You've already heard from some. You're going to hear from Select Board in a little bit. You also have town meeting races, which are unique to each precinct. So make sure you check out the town meeting race on your precinct. But I know what a lot of people are very interested in are the ballot questions. There are a total of 4 ballot questions on this year's ballot. One of them is a little bit funky, so I want to make sure people understand what's going on with them. Question 1 is a debt exclusion override pertaining to the Pierce School project. Question 2 is an operating override that's split into 2A and to 2B. And question 3 is the approval of a local bylaw related to marijuana shops. So for those who are particularly curious about question 2A and 2B, the way that it works is you can vote for both. You can vote for either one. You could vote for neither of them. If they both win, whichever one has the higher dollar amount is the ballot question that will be approved, and that is the money that will be borrowed. So if you want all of the money, feel free to vote for both of them. If you want none of the money, vote for neither of them. Just know that they cannot both pass. Whichever one is the higher dollar amount will be approved. Similarly, I know some people have had questions about 1, 2, and 3. Can you vote for all of them independently? The 3 ballot questions have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So if 1 passes, it's not going to have an impact on 2. If 2 passes, it's not going to have an impact on 3. So feel free to vote for them the way that you would like the most. Every single household in Brookline with a registered voter has received a mailing from the town. It's a packet which has information about these ballot questions. It has the language of the question, it has a summary from town council, including information about what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. And it has 150-word arguments from both the proponents and the opponents of the question. It's an incredibly helpful resource. It's something that I encourage you to look over. There are also copies on the back table of that. It's available on the website, and it'll be available in the polling locations on Election Day. So if you forget to bring your copy, you'll be able to get a copy there while you are voting. But I encourage you to read through them. There's a lot of very, very helpful information in there. This town election is incredibly exciting. It is the first election under the Votes Act, which is legislation that was passed last summer, which expands access to voting for everybody. Brookline voted for the town election to include those expansions that were applicable to the state elections. That means people have a lot of ways that they can vote. One of the big ones is you can vote by mail. Every single person should have gotten a postcard from my office that you can check off if you would like for us to mail you a ballot. If you check that off and sent it in, we've already sent about 4,000 ballots out. I have 10 town hall employees right now sitting in the front room of town hall, sending even more. So if you filled out that postcard and send it back in, we will send you a ballot in the mail. There are also extra applications in the back in case you would like them. The deadline to request that ballot is this upcoming Tuesday at 5 p.m. So if you haven't sent it in, make sure you send it in quickly. If you want to vote in person early, you don't want to wait until Election Day, you can do that. Starting this Saturday at Town Hall, we will have in-person early voting. It's going to run Saturday through Friday, every single day, 10 to 4 on the weekends, and then during our regular business hours during the week. And new this year, we are actually expanding to more locations. So anybody who lives in North Brookline, you can vote at the Coolidge Corner Library on Sunday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. People who live in South Brookline, you can vote at the Putterham Branch Library on Saturday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So I encourage you, if you would like to vote in person, you like walking into the voting booth, or if you're a little bit nervous about the post office, getting your ballot back in time, come on in, vote early, and we'll be able to make sure your vote gets counted. And then, of course, the big one is Election Day, May 2nd, from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. The polls will be open. You can go onto our website and look up your ballot, your precinct, to know where you're going to be headed. I want to give a special thank you to the many, many poll workers who I see in this room who work extremely long hours that day. They're in at 6. They can stay past 10. We could not do it without them. They're working hard to make sure that your vote can count. So if anybody has any questions or is looking for information, you can always give us a call at the clerk's office, 617-730-2010. You can always go and check out the website or come and visit us on the first floor of Town Hall. And the most important thing that I say is, it doesn't matter who you vote for, make sure you show up and you vote. So thank you guys so much. I look forward to seeing you guys all in the coming weeks, and vote on May 2nd.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, so all that information is in the back. Please check it out. Really helpful explainer about the ballot question, so definitely worth spending some time with. So if I can invite our select board candidates up, we'll move on to the main event. Come grab a seat. And I do have, I have water here if you guys want it. There's cups, so. So here's how we're going to do things. We're going to have 3-minute introductions from each of the candidates. And again, Matt Weiss is here keeping time, and so he will be holding up reminders of how the time is passing, and then I'll cut in if you're running over. Then we're going to have some questions. We're going to have 6 pre-selected questions from Brookline Can and the League of Women Voters, and then we're going to open things up. We'll take an audience question, and then we'll take an online pre-submitted question for folks who couldn't be here but are live streaming, or are not live streaming but couldn't be here. So I have some online pre-submitted questions, so we'll alternate between those. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to the questions. And it's a forum, not a debate, so we're not going to have crosstalk. And just you can answer the questions and we'll move on. And then 2-minute closing statements at the end. So we'll get to as much as we can. It's goofy, but I did a little random generator for order. And so we have Arden, John, and then Paul. And we're just going to rotate that. So Arden, John, Paul, Arden, and so on and so forth. And thank you for sitting in exactly the order that generated, which is chance. So thank you. Lucky me.
Wasn't planned.
So Arden, if you want to kick things off.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. It's a privilege to speak to this group. Thank you, Brookline Community Aging Networks and Brookline League of Women Voters, and an honor to be among this talented, impactful group of candidates. And I would like to introduce my mom, Sue Reamer. Hi, Mom. She is a senior here in Brookline. Yes, she deserves a round of applause for sure, and lives in Precinct 17. My family moved to Brookline in 1981. I grew up in Coolidge Corner and Chestnut Hill and felt a sense of connection to my neighborhood and optimism about the future. After college and graduate school, I returned home to Brookline to eventually raise my own family here. During this time, I established my roots in social services and supporting underserved women and their families, and advocating for women's reproductive rights and gender equality. After business school, I used my public nonprofit credentials to work in the executive office for administration and finance. I helped manage the $900 million Massachusetts public safety budget in a bipartisan government. It was there on Beacon Hill that I was first exposed to the challenges of balancing stakeholders' interests, the value of our dedicated public servants, and most importantly, the impact that government can have on our communities. As many of you can relate, it was my children who reignited my lifelong connection to our town. Our son and daughter entered the school formerly known as Devotion, and I got involved running the PTO and representing parents on the building committee. After reinforcing my community connections as a town meeting member in Precinct 8, I am now running for the Select Board because there are many goals I want to accomplish for this town that I love so dearly. And I believe that my goals for Brookline are shared by most of our residents. I think my values are aligned with those who also see a bright future for our town, but there is much work to be accomplished to get there. We have an affordability crisis on our hands in Brookline. Seniors who live here are concerned about an increase in taxes, and families who live here are being stretched too thin. On the Select Board, I will work with the other 4 members, the 255 town meeting members, and you, our community members, to problem solve our structural deficit and expand our commercial tax base. We are also facing a climate crisis, and even though this is in no way unique to Brookline, it is our responsibility to address it and meet our sustainability goals. These are just 2 of the goals I intend to accomplish if you elect me to the Select Board, which also include transparency and accountability to the budget process, as well as prudent fiscal oversight, affordable rents, and support for our thriving businesses to ensure that they remain thriving.
I'm going to have to ask you to leave it there, Arden.
All right,
you can get
thank
into
you.
the rest during the questions.
Lots I want to do.
John, take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's here today, everyone who's watching. I want to say that there's one thing that I have that, with all respect to Arden and with all respect to Paul, they can't claim to have, and that's experience of 3 years on the Select Board. I am your incumbent elected Select Board member who's been serving for 3 years, and I will also say to Paul and to Arden, it's a pleasure to have them in this campaign. It makes me feel like I've got to step up my game. And so I've been stepping up my game. I hope you've noticed. But it's been a pretty interesting 3 years. So I'm pretty proud of what we accomplished in those 3 years. And I want to cite just 3 things. One thing about running for Select Board is it's easy to sort of touch the issues that you know are issues people will identify with and to make promises to deal with those issues. What you can't do is anticipate the things that come out of nowhere that you didn't know were going to hit the town. And some of them are huge. COVID was huge. So I was in the middle of running for the Select Board for the first time when COVID hit. When I got elected to the Select Board, we had to figure out what is Brookline's response to COVID going to be. I think we did a pretty good job. I think Brookline got through COVID in good shape, better shape than a lot of other communities. And the fact that all of you are here today and feeling secure about going out now, where the COVID is over, is a great sign. The other thing that hit out of the blue, we had a police chief who stepped away from the job. We had to find a new police chief. Nobody knew that was going to be an issue, but we had to work on it, and it wasn't easy. And we hit a couple of, we hit a couple of stumbles in the road on the way to getting a new police chief, but guess what? If all goes according to plan, we're going to sign a contract with Jen Pastor on Tuesday, and we're going to have one of the first women police chiefs in Massachusetts. And that was something I was very focused on when I got elected. The other thing.
No applause until the end.
Oh, gosh. I thought I earned it. But the other thing is, I don't think anybody anticipated that at the local level, we would be playing as big a role as we have played in addressing climate change. But it quickly became apparent that there were people in every country all over the world that were making pledges of ambitious goals to address climate change, but we weren't meeting them. And it wasn't good enough to say at the local level, well, it's not our fault that at the national level and the state level, they're not going to meet their climate change goals. We had to show how it could be done. And that's why I got involved really I jumped into it with both feet. I learned as quickly as I could. And the first thing I learned was we need to step up our game. I already mentioned that about myself. We needed to step up our game on climate change, and we did with the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as the afternoon progresses. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Sorry to steal your applause, but we want to get to as much as we can.
That's fine.
All right, Paul, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Thank you to the League, to Brookline Can, and also to the Senior Center for hosting. And I also want to thank John and Arden for running what I consider to be a model campaign. It's been positive, it's been issues-based, and I want to thank them. So I've been a 12-year resident of Brookline. It's too loud. I'm a father of 5. I'm the grandfather of 2, and I'm also the I'm a stay-at-home dad for 2 children that are in the Lawrence School. I have a 3rd grader and a beeper that will be kindergarten next year. I changed my spiel a little bit. If you probably heard my spiel before, I'm changing it. I'm going to focus really on the issues that I believe I've helped our aging population with, and also things I'd like to see in the future. First, you remember those rental scooters that were all over the sidewalks? I got rid of those guys. Heather Hamilton, and no applause. Actually, Heather Hamilton, the former chair of the Select Board, and I co-sponsored a warrant article to stop that. I recently helped to resolve an audible signal at the St. Mary's Crosswalk. You know, when we dealt with COVID, all those automated buttons turned off the audible signals. And if you have a visual impairment, you don't know how to find the crosswalk if it's not audible. Whole Foods, did you hear that Whole Foods is now going to become an H-Mart? In St. Mary's, we lost our grocery store. It's a very serious issue for seniors. It's the place where they shopped. It was a local place. Well, I started a petition about a year ago. We gained over 600 signatures. I gave it to the lawyer for the family that owned the space. I gave it to the lawyer that was representing H-Mart, and H-Mart just announced that they're coming to St. Mary's. I also am the only candidate in front of you that voted for the means-tested property tax that was just signed into law by the governor. So some things that I'm thinking about the future. I want to say that representation matters. We don't have enough seniors on our boards and commissions. It's a lens that we have to always think about. Sidewalks and roads, they're tripping hazards. My mother-in-law lives around the corner. She can't walk safely from her house to our house. And the roads are a mess too. I do, as I mentioned, I want to increase the audible signals across the town. It's great that we fixed St. Mary's, but we need to fix them all. I would really like to see us make sure that we continue to fund our police and fire. We need to keep response times down because minutes matter, and most of our calls in our public safety have to do with seniors. And 1/4% of our budget goes to the Council on Aging. You represent 20% of Brookline. There's a problem. We need to work on increasing funding, increasing services. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. I look forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you all very much. So as a reminder, rotating the order. Now it'll be John, Paul, Arden, and then we'll keep rotating through that way. So these are going to be the 6 questions pre-selected by the League of Women Voters and Brookline Can. And we're going to start off with, what do you actually understand the job of a select board member to be?
Thanks very much. Wow, it has many, many dimensions. For starters, you are one of 5. So in part, your job is to persuade your fellow select board members to get behind certain initiatives that are important and to get 3 votes at least and maybe get 5 votes for initiatives. So you've got to be able to collaborate, you've got to be collegial, you've got to work with others. The fact that I'm now the vice chair of the select board, I think, tells you I was able to do that. You've got to be able to focus on priorities. It's amazing how many things that aren't priorities show up on the select board's agenda every week. You know, just routinely approving, somebody's going to have an event at Lars Anderson and they needed an approval of a liquor license. It goes on and on and on and on and on. You can't let it overwhelm you. As I said, shortly after I got elected, one of the priorities I wanted to focus on the most was to address climate change meaningfully at the local level, to show that it could be done. And that led me to take a hard look at what we had at the time, which was the Select Board's Climate Advisory Board. And I talked to members of that board. We developed an idea which we should have something called the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, which would report directly to the Select Board and also have take the initiative to bring articles to town meeting. And that's why Brookline today is one of the climate leaders in the entire state. And I see that I'm at 0 seconds, so I'll end it right there for that question.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Sure. So the select board does, as John mentioned, many mundane things that are very important. Licensing, appointing, hiring, which is not mundane. It's very important what John mentioned about Jen Pastor. But one of the most important things that it does is it provides leadership for the town. And that leadership includes planning. And it's something that we really haven't been doing enough of. And I believe that we need to bring much more planning focus, future focus to the select board. Working to figure out how we're going to deal with our structural deficit is critical. We need to figure out how we're going to continue to grow and where, and how we're going to support affordable housing, keeping Brookline affordable. The select board has an important role in providing leadership. And I think in the past few years, we've been kind of stuck in the day-to-day. The other thing that the select board does is it sets the tone for how we work together as a community. And the tone for the past few years has been difficult, and I think that it needs to improve. So I'm hoping, should I be able to join the board, that I could help improve the tone and the collegiality within the board and also across the town. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden.
Yes, thank you so much. And John, thank you for your leadership these past 3 years.
Thank you.
So I think that one of the most important things, so yes, on the select board, we do all of those things. But the key part of it is executive leadership. And when we're talking about the budget, because the budget is exactly what the select board does, and that impacts all of us every single day. And so when we're looking at our budgeting process, we need to think about our priorities. Before we sit down and do our departmental budget, we need to know what the priorities are of you, our constituents, and we need to hear from you. So I was thinking that one of the things we should do differently as your leadership board, as me being one of 5, is to have a town hall before each of our budget cycles. That's what I did as a town meeting member in Precinct 8, and ask you, what are your priorities? What do we need to be prioritizing for our budget on the executive board? And then we come up with our plan, our strategic plan. And then we make sure that all of our municipal services are getting met. And then we think about expanding our commercial tax base and how we create and keep a thriving Brookline so that you don't have to pay additional property taxes, because that's a tax burden to all of you, and that's where my leadership will come in on the executive board. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So now it'll be Paul first, then Arden, then John. Second question, how do you want to see Brookline respond to the MBTA community zoning law? This is the new state law that changes the zoning rules around MBTA sites.
Certainly. So first and foremost, the MBTA Communities Act is a law. It's a Massachusetts law, and we need to comply with the law. We need to find a way to bring proposals to town meeting in November that will require a 2/3 vote. That's a very high hurdle. You probably have heard some noise about this topic because it is one of the things that's discussed extensively. One of the biggest challenges that we have with the current proposal, or just the MBTA Communities Act, is that we can't require commercial on the first floor. We cannot lose our existing commercial space. It's critical to our budget, and in fact, we need to expand it. So two things. One, I believe that we should, no matter what we pass at town meeting, it should require commercial on the first floor, and we'll go have a conversation with the Attorney General about why that's really important to us. We can't go backwards. Second, it's critical that we build as much deed-restricted, income-restricted affordable housing along our proposal corridor, because we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build income-restricted housing for low-income and middle-income families, and we have to be intentional about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
I'm so glad that you asked this question. So Paul mentioned that we need to work with the Department of Housing and Community Development. We need to make sure that if and when we comply with the MBTA Communities Act by December 2023, that we have a plan that works for Brookline. And our state representative, Tommy Vitolo, actually filed an amendment called H3900, providing for smart growth opportunities near transit. And I brought a copy of it, because what it says is that what his amendment is asking is that we pass a bill that says we must require the commercial space if we're going to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. And that's critical, because we're talking about our thriving businesses, right? I keep talking about expanding our commercial tax base, because that helps all of you. And the other thing I want to talk about is affordability. There was a wonderful article in the Pew Charitable Trust that my colleague Charlie Homer, who's a town meeting member in Precinct 8, sent out to all of us. And it talked about 4 different cities and how they've had form-based zoning, which is this type of zoning that we are looking at for compliance, and they built more units. And do you know that rents stabilized? And that is key, because we're looking at how can compliance with the MBTA Communities Act impact all of us and our community in a positive way. Thank you.
All right, thanks. John.
I want to talk about what we have done. And in fact, it's already been alluded to by Arden and a little bit by Paul. When this came before the Select Board, it came before the Select Board as something about which the town would not have much choice, if any choice at all. It was basically a result of a law passed by the legislature, which then led to guidelines put together by called the Department of Housing and Community Development. And under the guidelines and under the law, we were going to have to go ahead with this plan that would potentially have the effect on Harvard Street that none of us want to have. It could disincentivize retail development. Harvard Street is the heart of Brookline, because it is the retail and restaurant heart of Brookline. That's what makes Harvard Street exciting. We can't lose that. And so the initial reaction was, what are we going to do? The way this is written, we could end up with, years from now, housing in place of retail on Harvard Street. We want housing, but we don't want it to replace retail. On the Select Board, I was one of 2, maybe 3, that said, we got to push back. And it's not popular to push back. The Global editorialize against you and make you sound like you're against housing. But we knew we had to make this better. And what Tommy filed today is in part a result of work that was done on the Select Board by me, by Chair Bernard Green, to get the Planning Department to pressure the DHCD and to get Tommy in the legislature to look for things that could benefit us in terms of retaining commercial and retail space. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, John. And so we're going to stay on a related topic. Arden, you're up first this time. And what would you do as a member of the Select Board to encourage economic development in Brookline?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. I thought we might be going there at some point. So I actually wrote some notes from the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee recommendations. That's BFAC for short. And I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but because they have been putting recommendations along with the Economic Development Board, two of our critical committees here in Brookline, in front of the Select Board for the last several years, and those recommendations have not been met. So I made some notes because I want you to know what I am committed to doing in following Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee recommendations if I'm elected to the Select Board. One, we need to look at how we can increase our local fees and taxes, of course. I mean, our local fees and receipts, that's small. And we need to look at our pilots, our payment in lieu of taxes, make sure our nonprofits are paying their part. We need to make sure that our businesses are thriving and that they are expanding and that they have customers here in Brookline in our community development centers. And we need to look at different economic developments, like the Lower Boylston Street corridor, which the Select Board had been looking at, but nothing has come of that. And that was a prime opportunity for development over on Boylston Street. We have another plot down in Chestnut Hill. This is all commercial development that we need to look at because we can receive taxes for those that are not property taxes. And I have a list about 5 other things which we can get into at another time.
Thanks, Arden. Take it away, John.
At the outset, I mentioned how when I first ran for the Select Board, COVID hadn't even been heard of. Then I got elected to the Select Board, and we were in the midst of having to deal with COVID. And one of the first things that happened was that I began to get phone calls from some of the restaurant owners in town. Desperate. That as far as they were concerned, they could be out of business in a matter of weeks or months at the most. And think back to those days, and I think you will agree with me, nobody had thought that we would someday have these shelters on the sidewalks so that people could dine outdoors all year round, even in winter. But that was the kind of thing the restaurants needed if they were going to survive COVID. And I began to make some calls. I began to make some calls to Mel Kleckner, our town administrator. I made some calls to our building department. Can you give a little bit of, cut a little bit of slack for these restaurant owners who are trying to build these impromptu shelters so that people could dine outside during COVID? Because we acted quickly and those shelters got built and we figured out how to keep the relationship between the building department, the inspectors, and the restaurant owners going strong, they were able to survive. Our retail folks, our retail districts are bouncing back largely because of the thriving restaurant trade in Brookline, and you got to make those decisions that you weren't prepared for. That's what being a member of the Select Board is all about.
Thanks, John. Paul.
Thank you. So I first want to reemphasize what I said earlier, that we absolutely need to protect the existing commercial square footage that we have in place. And that's part of the MBTA Communities Act. We cannot lose any ground there. But I'm really a hands-on person. And I'll give you 2 quick examples. The first is the O'Leary's building down in St. Mary's. You may know that's sold. It sold for like $15 million. When that occurred, I made the phone call to the lawyer representing the person who bought the building, and I said, you need to get ahead of the process of trying to get something done there. And I hosted with the lawyer for the owner of the building a community-wide engagement session where they presented their thoughts, they listened to the community, listened to the neighborhood, and the support from the neighborhood was overwhelming for the plans that they brought to the planning department. That to me is proactive leadership. The second is, I'm going to bring it up again, H Mart. When we lost Whole Foods, I actively worked to bring parties together to talk to the owner of the building, to talk to potential occupants like H Mart, and engage people that were working with them to make that happen. I think we need to do more of that. The Select Board should be intimately engaged in encouraging, supporting, and enticing business to come into the town. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. So, John, you'll be up first for the next question. As a member of Select Board, what is your plan to communicate with and be available to the community?
Well, to keep doing what I'm doing, I guess would be a good way of answering that question. Let me tell you about a couple of things that I don't think any other Select Board member has done, at least in my time. I'm a retired journalist. I was a journalist as a local newspaper editor way back when, right here in Brookline. Then I went on to be a TV journalist at Channel 2, WGBH. Then I went on to become a TV journalist at New England Cable News, NBC 10 Boston. Then I retired. One of the things when I ran for select board that struck me immediately was we're losing what remaining news sources we have. Now we've lost them. They're gone. And that getting news about government is essential to our having a democracy that works. If people aren't informed, we're not going to have a democracy that works. So as a select board member and a retired journalist, I said, hey, not only can I volunteer my time on the select board, I can volunteer my talents as a journalist to report on what is going on at Town Hall, what's going on with the Select Board, what's going on with the school committee. I started something called Good Government for Brookline. And once I started Good Government for Brookline, I started something called the All Politics is Local newsletter. I began sending that out weekly. I have now sent out over 70 weekly newsletters to a mailing list of upwards of 700 people during my time on the select board, and it is the one thing I get thanked most for since I got elected on the select board. We need communication.
Thanks, John.
And I'm going to do it. If I have to do it myself, I'm going to do it.
All right, thanks, John. Paul.
Thank you. So I'm going to maybe take a little bit of a different twist here, as opposed to people know how to get a hold of me. I have a lot of engagement. I've got a great list in Brookline, and I stay in communication with folks. But I think the biggest challenge we have right now is how to engage with the town. If you go to the website, you want to understand what meeting might be happening, when is it going to happen, what your interests are, when you should show up, what's the best way to show up, how can you offer written or public comments. Our ability to communicate electronically through our website is not great. But the second most important thing that's happened with COVID is using Zoom. We need to continue to engage using Zoom on all of our boards and commissions and meetings. I think it's critical that we continue to do that. I see more faces over Zoom that I've never seen before in person, and I'm grateful for that. And I think that's one of the greatest things that we can do to increase participation in our government, which is very important for our democracy. So I would encourage Zoom more, that type of hybrid meetings, and also a much better experience with the website so you know what's going on in town. And I love the new town administrator's his letter that he sends out. He does a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that we reformat that document you get describing ballot questions for next 10 years election. But first of all, I also want to give a shout out to Brookline News. Brookline News has done a wonderful job of launching the news, and I've been reading it about the election, so I want to give a shout out. But if I'm on the select board, what I really want to do for you is to host town halls, like I said before. I want to hear from you on what your budget priorities are, and I want to make sure that the town is meeting them. And that's the kind of communication I'm talking about. So whether that's on Zoom, in person, or hybrid, of which it would probably be all three, I want to hear from our constituents. I want to hear from the stakeholders in this town, and that is you all. And I'm going to make sure that you have the opportunity to come before all of us and let us know your priorities for our budget that impact all of us and your bottom line.
All right, thank you all. And so, Paul, you'll be up first on this next question. Some of you may be familiar with programs that municipalities have been experimenting with, like the one in Newton, to provide a more flexible public transportation option. So do you favor creating a flexible, affordable, and on-demand public transportation system in Brookline? And if so, what trade-offs would you be prepared to make to fund such a system?
So, that's an easy one. Yes, I would very much like to have a flexible transportation system for seniors. And actually, Newton uses it. It's underwritten by a bunch of people, including youth, that can use that. But, I'm a planner. I can't answer where I would get the money from yet, or what I would move money from one bucket to the other. I think we need to study it. We need to take a hard look at what the service would be, How expansive would it be? But absolutely, you know, one of our growing constituents areas is out in South Brookline. We're building 900 housing units. You know, we need, and seniors are moving into that area. We need to find a way to help them get to their appointments, engage with the senior center, you know, et cetera. So I'm in favor of exploring it. We need to figure out how to fund it. I think Newton's done a remarkable job.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
So I've actually seen the NUMO picking up students, that's the Newton Transportation System, picking up students from Newton South High School, and it is really great, and I am sure it's even better for the seniors in Newton. So I would absolutely support a transportation system like that, and we will find a way to fund it, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. I've seen it in Newton. The other thing we want to think about is the Fisher Hill property. We want to think about, is it right to have a place where seniors can go, an annex senior center where they can go and they can park somewhere that's accessible to South Brookline. So we want to look at what we're going to do with that Fisher Hill property. We want to make sure that we get a committee together that's well represented by seniors, and we look if that's the right thing so that seniors do have transportation accessible and parking at some sort of annex or some sort of senior center. And I also want to make sure that we have the right amount of parking and accessibility here in Coolidge Corner so that those that have their own methods of transportation can get here. But if we come up with a system, a bus, if they're able to fund an additional bus for the senior center or two, that there's a place that it can, that those who come can park and utilize the services, and that you have the buses to help transport you if you don't have your own transportation. Because getting from point A to point B is pretty much the most important thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. John.
The risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to talk about what I have done. I gladly accepted the appointment to be Brookline's liaison to the Council on Aging after I got elected. I wonder how they decided I should be the liaison to the Council on Aging. But I've been to every single Council on Aging meeting since then, and boy, do I enjoy those meetings. And because I was attending those meetings on a regular basis, and also the meetings of what is it's called, oh my gosh, Matt Weiss, the Age-Friendly Cities, Age-Friendly Cities Committee. Thank you, Matt. I became very aware of Newton's program. It is called NUMO. I spoke to Ruth Ann Dobeck, you know, who's the head of senior services in Brookline, and said, what about scheduling the director of the NUMO program for a presentation at a Council on Aging meeting? And she did, and it turns out she knows that person really well. And it turns out that person is celebrated for putting that program together in Newton. So we kind of broke ground on the idea that if Newton could do it, then maybe Brookline could do it. But no one should think it's easy. And even in Newton, where they've had very good experience with this, and it's been growing rapidly, that's the thing about programs that are really good and serve people, is that they grow rapidly. They're still figuring out how they're going to pay for it and make it continue into the future. And on that point, Paul is right. If Brookline's going to do it, it's going to take some planning, and we're going to have to figure out, because the Newton program, I think, has grown to about $1 million program at this point.
Thank you all. So Arden, you'll be up first. This is our last pre-prepared question from Brookline Can and the League, and then after that, we'll open things up, and we'll be alternating between questions from the audience and pre-submitted online questions. So last question from this first batch. What would you do as a member of the Select Board to address the structural deficit that has resulted in repetitive overrides and debt exclusions?
Yes, thank you for that. I did talk about that earlier because I do think that there's several things that we could do. I think that we need to look at our commercial development corridor studies, and I mentioned two of them, the Lower Boylston Street and then over in Chestnut Hill. I think we have to absolutely make sure that our businesses here in our commercial hubs like Coolidge Corner, Washington Square, Brookline Village, that those businesses remain thriving. And we need to make sure that we are doing whatever is right to keep those businesses thriving, because we want people shopping where they live and living where they shop, and we talk about transportation. We want that to be happening in transportation accessible areas, right? Because then people can shop and live and eat all without having to drive or park. We want to look at things like, well, we already passed the Community Preservation Act. We now have, I think, $6 million accrued. Now that has to be spent in 4 different buckets, but it helps relieve some of the tax burden and some of the expenses from other areas on our budget in Brookline. So that's another thing. And of course, we look at our pilots. My colleagues on town meeting in Precinct 8, Alec Leibovitz and Mike Toffel, have currently brought transparency to our payment in lieu of taxes. We have some very large nonprofits here in Brookline, hospitals and schools, and looking at how they can contribute more to our bottom line here in Brookline. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. John.
Here I go again, talking about things done. I think people might be aware that there's been a really interesting debate going on in Brookline politics over the last 2 years having to do with comprehensive planning. And there were some people who basically saw it as being kind of a smokescreen for, we're going to try to avoid having to build additional units of housing. I and a bunch of other folks, I think we were not afraid to say, you don't have to fear comprehensive planning. Comprehensive planning is how we get added units of housing. Comprehensive planning is how we save retail districts. And so the initiative was kind of born that people should highlight comprehensive planning as something that we in Brookline need to focus on. And it ended up being put into an article for a town meeting. People like me ended up fighting for it. Paul fought for it. Linda Olson-Pelkey, whose name I'm going to mention right now because she is very crucial to all of this, and to this day is fighting for comprehensive planning to be part of that process by which we comply with the MBTA-CA Communities Act. So I think that's probably the most important thing I've done during the select board to make sure that going forward, we don't allow events to drive us. We comprehensively plan so that we can have the future we as citizens of Brookline want.
Thanks, John. And Paul.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate John talking about comprehensive planning. I founded Brookline by Design. I filed the comprehensive planning warrant article, and I appreciated John's support, and also filed an amendment to the budget when the comprehensive plan was not funded by the select board. But let's talk about structural deficit. There's a very simple problem that we have. Our costs are growing at 6 to 8%, 6 to 9% annually because the cost of goods and services, labor, salaries, everything's going up. But we're limited by our ability to raise revenue by Proposition 2.5. Those numbers don't work. It's unsustainable to, if we're going to continue without having any type of change in revenue, the level of services that you're getting for your money is going down. And I think we're experiencing that right now, where for the same money that you're paying, you're getting less from services from the town. So I think Arden may have mentioned BFAC. We need to initiate a comprehensive plan to deal with the structural deficit. It should be at least a 10-year plan, and it should give visibility into, one, how we're going to increase revenue from commercial and other development, but also it should forecast, if we are not able to raise revenue from commercial development, what the impact is going to be on residential taxes. We owe it to you as your government to give you visibility into what the future is going to hold for the cost of living in Brookline, and right now we don't provide that visibility. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. So those are our pre-prepared questions. So here's how we're going to do the next part. So Jamie Jensen's in the back, and she's got the mic. So she is going to help me keep track of folks who want to ask a question. So we're going to take a question from the audience. We're going to take an online question. We're going to take a question from the audience. We're going to take an online question. And so throw your hands up. I think I see one person over there. I saw the first hand, and then we'll cycle back through. I see 4 across here.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Arthur Conquest, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. I want to know what you have learned from the decision that was handed down by the Massachusetts Judicial Court on the Gerald Alston case, and what you will do to address structural racism in the town of Brookline.
And thank you for the question. And John, it's going to be you first.
Hey, Arthur, thank you very much for that question. If any of you watched select board meetings recently, you would have witnessed, something that I'm afraid to say we in Brookline can't really be proud of, and that is a parade of people coming to the microphone saying that nothing has changed, that the select board is still tone deaf to people in the community who are non-white, tone deaf to people in the community who are economically distressed. I don't think that's true. I think that we have learned since that decision came down, Arthur. We've learned through very, very painful experience. We had to go through a considerable struggle to deal with the call for changes in policing. I think we're getting towards some changes in policing, and Jen Pastor is going to be a great leader of that. I think we are getting toward and making progress toward better recognition of the need for government to be directly involved in helping communities. And one thing that I'm pledging myself to is money such as ARPA will not go to consultants. It's going to go to people in the community or programs for people in the community, not to further studying of this problem. Making progress, but got a long way to go. But let's start with getting money and programs into the hands of people in the community.
Thanks, John. Paul.
Sure. So, Arthur, thank you for your question. We haven't done enough, Arthur, as a result of, we paid $11 million to settle that. I wish, we would have done something different, frankly, earlier. But I don't necessarily know if we've learned completely enough and fast enough from that situation. John referenced the Black and Brown Club coming to the select board meeting. I listened to their public comment. It's for an article for those that aren't aware. They were looking for ARPA money fund to do certain things for Black and Brown Club, and it's not, and they didn't get the money. And their rhetoric was very strong, Arthur, but what I heard from them was, you don't see us, you don't know us, you're not helping us. I heard very strong emotion, I heard concern, and I heard they're just fed up. And so, one of their requests, which was, I believe, for some programming, I think we should have given them some programming. So we're not doing enough. I believe that we need to do much more, especially for our Black and brown youth, while they're in the school system, helping them, encouraging them. They don't always have the resources to go visit schools or travel to go see schools. We need to help them. And if they want to go into the trades, we should encourage that and assist with that as well. There's much more that we can do, Arthur. We're not doing enough to answer your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
Thank you, Arthur. Yes, systemic and structural racism was a problem and is a problem, absolutely. And I support reparations. And when a system or structure behaves badly, reparations should be paid. But I also want to talk about the future and what we can do differently here in Brookline, and I have a list. One is the opportunity gap that exists in our schools. So we need to talk about how we can eradicate that and make sure that all our children are being educated the same. But we also need to talk about that in terms of our entire population, including our seniors. So when we're looking at our boards and commissions, because we are a citizen government, we need to make sure that everyone is represented on those boards and commissions. So we need a metric to make sure that you're all represented and that everyone is represented on them. We also need to have something, a committee, a commission, a board for minority-owned and women-owned businesses. Those would help expand our commercial tax base and help keep our businesses thriving, and we absolutely need that. But last but not least, I don't want to forget about women's reproductive rights. I am actually in the process of filing a warrant Article 20 with Rebecca Stone and the Commission for Women, because women's reproductive rights and gender-affirming care are under a threat in our country, and we are going to protect them here in Brookline. And you can all see our warrant Article 20, which will be at town meeting, Safe Haven Brookline, protecting women's reproductive rights and gender-affirming care here. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. And so it will be Paul first for the next question. And so sort of 3 questions rolled into one, all on the same topic. Do you see the presence of rodents in town as a health and safety issue? What is your position on the town's role in rodent control and funding that work? And specifically, do you support continued use of rat monitoring and control boxes?
Rats. Is Fran Perler somewhere? There she is, Fran.
Yeah, this is Fran's question.
So listen, this is Fran's question. So when Fran sent me an email asking me to sign a petition, you know, instead of replying and signing her petition, I got in my car and I drove over to her house. And I sat with her in Maryland for 2 hours. We talked for an hour and then we toured for about an hour. And I was amazed at the war that was being waged in that neighborhood against the rats. It really was, people were building castle walls. To answer your question, rodents were a huge problem. You know, I support the effort to eradicate them. I talked at length with the Commissioner of Public Works about how she plans on doing that. I have great faith that Erin Gallantine's going to rise to the occasion and do battle with the rats. We do need to monitor them, but you have to understand, this is a base quality of life expectation that you have from your town when you pay your taxes to fight and deal with the rats. And it's in the operating override, which is kind of disappointing to me a little bit. I really think this is a base tax issue. But you know, I spoke with one woman that had rats in her house and she couldn't get rid of them. Nobody should have rats living in their wall in Brookline because we're not enforcing our regulations, we're not enforcing dumpster codes, we're not making sure that people are storing their trash properly, or they're not putting their trash out, they're putting it out at night. So, Fran, thank you for doing battle with the rats. I'm with you in solidarity.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
Yes, Fran, I have to give a shout out to you. Of course, we're colleagues in Precinct 8, and Fran is running for town meeting in Precinct 8, and I fully plan to vote for it because, as she said, the women need to stick together. But I think this is an example of how it's important to understand and know what the priorities are of our community. Because if we had known from the beginning, if our community, you all had a voice, we would have understood, the select board would have understood that rats were a priority for all of you and we needed funding to help eradicate the rat situation. I'm hoping that now that it's being addressed from all different angles and all different, a comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan, which will hopefully be funded if the override passes, then will be funded. But we also need to talk about inspections and fines for mishandled garbage. And my colleague, hopefully our colleague on town meeting in Precinct 8, has filed a warrant article to fine businesses their small fines if they are improperly storing their garbage. So while we are doing things like using modern pest to abate them, while we are going to hire additional inspectors if the override passes, we also hopefully will pass this warrant article that will help produce fines so that people and businesses will be motivated, and buildings, large residential buildings, will be motivated to store their garbage correctly. It takes a comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Arden. John.
Let me say a word, well, first I'll say a word about Fran. I don't want to leave her out, but because she and I talk frequently about this problem, and in fact, just yesterday, after the Council on Aging meeting, she and I had another discussion about this meeting. But even more than that, I want to talk about Aaron Galentine, head of DPW, and Sigal Rees, head of Brookline's Department of Public Health. Those are the two people who are most involved in addressing the rat problem, and they are addressing the rat problem. Not everything about Brookline's response has been what people, the maximum that people are looking for, but here's something that may have occurred to you. Not everyone in this room agrees on what we should do. As soon as we came up with a method that we thought was an acceptable method that would actually electrocute rats, we found out that there are people who feel very strongly that's inhumane. So the Select Board has appropriated extra monies for this program. I personally have used my position on the Select Board. Every time Erin Galentine comes before the board, she knows I'm going to ask what kind of progress we're making on the rat problem. Sigal Rees came before the Select Board Tuesday. Maybe she didn't anticipate it, but I made sure she addressed what are we doing about the rat problem, and are we making progress? That's the number one thing that I think I'm going to focus on and continue to focus on.
All right, thanks, John. So Arden, you'll be up next. And we had 4 hands that went up right through the front here. And so we'll take those 4. We should have time for all of you.
Hi, my name is Alan Shepro. I live a couple buildings down right over the speed bump on Winchester Street. There are just so many things I'd like to mention. First of all, this past weekend,
Keep it to 1, though, Alan.
Okay. I am concerned about the infrastructure in Brookline and what the town is doing to work with Eversource, who maintains the electrical infrastructure in Brookline. A couple of years ago, on a very hot and humid summer evening, my electricity went out. I couldn't stand it in the house, so I took a walk around the block and enjoyed whatever breeze was out there. Yes, this is going to be very long-winded, and I apologize for that. I saw the electrical workers working feverishly to fix the problem, and I asked them, what is the problem? They said that the circuit was just overloaded. Okay? This past summer...
So take about 30 more seconds, and then we'll want the question to wrap
this
up.
past summer, the same thing happened, and again, the same reason. The system was overloaded. When a couple of years ago, when I was working for the town of Brookline in Town Hall, my wife calls me and said, hey, the electricity went out, but only some of the rooms. Calling Eversource, they said there were 2 lines coming in. One of those lines went down. The circuits were overloaded. And again, a couple of weeks ago, well, at this point, a couple of months ago, again, the same thing, the circuits are overloaded. I'm concerned with Brookline wanting to get rid of our gas stoves and our gas dryers, going for electricity, going all electric.
I think we caught your drift, Alan.
I am concerned about wanting to go to
electrical
electric
overload
cars.
on the system.
I'd like to know, what is Brookline's plan about our electric grid and the future of the electric grid so that our power doesn't go out? Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. So Arden, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Alan, and I'm so sorry for that. And I know, got it. But anyway, I would like to make a difference. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about what Brookline is doing differently. And that is that they are in a chance to talk about how we are working towards a goal of net zero by 2040 with a 50% reduction by 2030. So there are a couple of things we can do. One is they are installing photovoltaics on our buildings. They have them in the Denny Health building, so those are solar panels. So that is a source of energy. They have them on the Denny Health building. I saw them put them up on the Ruffin Ridley School, and that is a way of relieving our grid. So we are now going to we're going to do geothermal at the Driscoll School. Town meeting approved that last year. So that means our heat is not a burden at the Driscoll School on the grid itself. It's geothermal heat coming from the ground. And if you pass the debt exclusion for the Pierce School, we are going to have a net zero, and we're going to do that at the Driscoll School. And the other thing I'd like to give a shout out for is our community aggregation plan. And that's something that I sign up for. So actually, my power doesn't come through Eversource, it comes through our community aggregate, which makes it more affordable. So I get 100% green, but it's more affordable than if you are going to get it through Eversource. So if you haven't signed up for our community aggregate, I would highly recommend that you do that. And as the select board, we can make sure that Eversource is complying in every way that they need to here in our town, absolutely.
So thanks, Alan. Thanks, Arden. And John, take it away.
Yeah, Alan has put his finger on a very real situation. But the honest answer to the question is, I hope this doesn't shock people, Brookline is not by itself going to solve the problems of the electrical grid. That's a state, regional, national problem, and it's a significant one because, as Alan points out, if we're going to do all the things necessary to meet climate goals, we're going to have to electrify just about everything eventually. And he was right to identify that we, at one point, we were more focused on stoves, but I think right now the next thing you're going to hear a lot about is a program that will focus on gas hot water heaters and try to convert gas hot water heaters to electric hot water heaters. It's going to cost money. We're going to have to figure out where that money comes from. It's going to require training. It's going to require the plumber who usually shows up to deal with an issue to not tell you just replace your gas hot water heater with another gas hot water heater, but to be educated about electric hot water heaters and how they can be just as good, much better for the environment. But we got to do these things and keep the pressure on for the state and the region and then at the national level to address the problems of the grid. And if we keep the pressure on at the local level, that's how we contribute to the pressure being applied to solving the problems of the grid.
Thanks, John. Paul?
I keep watching Alan shake his head, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm not going to. So Alan, you raise a good point, and I'm going to get to the core, I think, is what he's talking about. We are asking commercial operators and owners, residential homeowners, to get off of fossil fuels by electrifying their buildings. And that is going to create significant demand for electricity and cost, right? So you're doing the money thing, for homeowners. But importantly, it's going to put a lot more demand on the grid. And John's right. Brookline's control of the electric grid in Brookline is limited. We need to work with the state because the current electrical grid is not supporting the demand. But also we're working on the supply. We need to make the supply more green. But still, if you make the supply more green, the wire that brings the electricity into your house, right, is insufficient often to deal with the load. And the network for electricity within your neighborhood is often insufficient to deal with the load. So I think to answer your direct question, we need to work with the state to insist, as we incentivize people and give them rebates to move to electricity, that we need to make sure that we're also upgrading and making the grid more sustainable. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Paul. So, John, you're up first. This is another one of our questions that were pre-submitted. So, tell us about your support or opposition to the Pierce School debt exclusion, and if you are in opposition, what's your plan for making sure that the Pierce School community is taken care of and has an up-to-code school?
So the fact that I am the only member of the select board who is opposed to the $212 million project to build a new Pierce School, I think tells you a lot about who I am. I have encountered people more and more in recent days who are coming up to me and saying, I'm actually changing my mind about the Pierce School plan. Because they've been listening. They've been listening to the back and forth, the arguments or the facts being presented by the yes side the arguments, the facts being presented by the no side on question 1. And more, they're beginning to wonder, why did we find ourselves in this position of facing only one choice here, and that is to spend this really unprecedented amount of money to replace one school. And it's a long story, and I won't go into all the details, but I wasn't afraid to ask that question at the beginning of the process. And it didn't make me popular. But I knew that there were a lot of problems with what the decision that was being presented to us as being sort of the only way to go. There's no way to go with this. The number one reason that I knew there was something wrong with that was because it started with the assumption that at 50 years, that building was at the end of its useful life. And I knew that was wrong, so how many other things about what we were being told would turn out to be wrong? And I began to pursue it, and more people are coming around to taking a very careful look at that proposal.
Thanks, John. Paul.
Yep. So first I'll say this is certainly, I've spoken to hundreds of people as I've knocked on doors for my campaign, and people are concerned about rising costs, the cost of ownership in Brookline through taxes, and there's also people that are very concerned about the quality of the education for the Pierce School children. I'm in favor of question 1. I disagree with John. I went to a school just like the Pierce School when I was in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And it was a horrendous educational experience for me because it was an open classroom school. The open classroom form of education, it's a theory, was, I think, a test that was inflicted upon the children of the 70s. It was horrendous. And the mistake that was made was that the buildings were made to form to the theory of the education. If you're a child that has hearing loss or a physical limitation, you can't go to the Pierce School. You need to go somewhere else. And I will say openly that Amy and I, who have 2 young children, used to live near the Pierce School. And we moved away. We would not have sent our children to the Pierce School. I can't in good conscience ask the parents of the children of the Pierce School to continue to send their children and for us to say no in hopes that some other plan will be in the future. I actually believe that the cost will not go down for the Pierce School. I think the committee that looked at many, many options came up with the right one. It's very expensive. It's $174 million, a lot of money. But I believe that the cost isn't going to go down. It will only go up because of inflation, the cost of money, labor, and materials. So right or wrong, that's my position. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
Yes, thank you for the question. So before I came here today, as I asked my mom, as you know, she's here today in the audience, and I asked her, I said, Mom, can you explain to me, you're a senior here in Brookline, you're on a fixed income, can you explain to me why you support the Pierce debt exclusion? And so she went and she did some research, and she came back to me and she said, well, that's an incredible board of 18 people who spent a couple of years looking at, I think it's 6 different models, and it's chaired by Bernard Green, who's currently chair of the select board, and Helen Charlepsky, who's been on the select board, on the school committee since before I think I was born. No, for decades. And she's built a lot of schools. And my mom said, hi Helen. And my mom said, these are really experienced, knowledgeable people. And look at all this work they did. And they looked at all these different models, and this is what they came up with. And then she wrote something up for me, and she made 30 copies, and she brought them. So if you want to hear why my mom, an 81-year-old senior on a fixed income, is voting for the debt exclusion, I can give you copies. She has them in her bag. But I like to talk, and we talked about educational equity, and that's really what it's about here in Brookline, because my kids have gone to the beautiful, state-of-the-art, ADA compliant, accessible, handicap accessible Ruffin Ridley School and the 22 Tappan at Brookline High School. And why is it that my mom's friends' grandkids and my friends' kids go to a school that is really in terrible, terrible condition? Thank you.
All right, thanks, Arden. So John, you'll be up next, another live question, and we had 3 hands that I want to make sure we get to. So we're going to take 3 live questions in a row. And so I know one's over there, one's there, and there was another hand over here.
Hello. Thank you for your presentations and your efforts. Before I ask my question, I just want to mention that I think part of the reason for the rat problem is the unbelievable amount of construction that is going on all around Brookline and Boston. And I don't know the answer to that. This is not my field, but I've never seen rats in Brookline before, and now they're rampant. I see rat holes all over the place walking around. So, and I've seen rats. So I just want to throw that out there. My question for you is, I want to ask you to put yourself in our shoes as voters. Oh, sorry. I want to ask you to put yourself in our shoes as voters. We have to make a decision about who we should vote for. And I've gone to many of these candidates forums. I applaud the fact that they're often extremely civil, but they are so civil that it makes it difficult as a voter to figure out the real differences among the candidates. And since you know each other better probably than most of us know you, I would like to ask you to explain why should I vote for each of you rather than the people you're running against in a very clear, laid out way. You've each mentioned some reasons, you each have different ideas, and I applaud that. But I want you to lay out for me your argument for yourself versus the other two candidates.
Thank you. John, you're up first.
Told you it's tough questions. Great question.
And I guess one of the ways for me to differentiate myself, despite at the beginning we were told we're not going to have a debate today, I do want to just tick off a few points about what was said on Pierce, and then I'll get to your question. It is absolute. Of course, I won't argue with Arden that her mother feels that she can afford it. A lot of the people I'm hearing from are seniors who can't afford it, okay? So that needs to be known by people. I heard it said that Helen Charlepsky, true, built a lot of schools. The most recent one that's almost done is Driscoll, 120 million or so, about half of what the Pierce is going to cost us. A lot of distinguished people on that committee that came up with this $212 million project. But there's also a former school committee person who wrote to a lot of us just today, Fred Wang, saying there has not been an adequate explanation of why this project costs $212 million. So, end of that. On to your question, experience. Paul, to my right, he can speak for himself as to a lot of things he's been involved in, and he has. He's introduced stuff at town meeting. He has petitioned. My favorite part of Paul's activities is that he petitioned and now we're getting this H-Mart at St. Mary's part of Brookline. That's great, but he hasn't served on the select board, and I have, and I think that experience needs to continue. That board needs the experience of somebody who has dared to challenge the other members of the board on a variety of issues, including something like the Pierce School.
Thanks,
Arden,
John.
I would say the same. It's all about experience.
Yeah. And Paul.
So it's a great question. I'm going to tell you about myself. And I'm going to leave it to you to differentiate. So I am unique as a candidate for the select board. I bring 30 years of executive business experience. I've managed large organizations. I've developed, planned, managed, budgets in excess of $50 million to $100 million. I've managed organizations. I've incentivized employees. I've worked with senior executives at some of the top firms in the country to help them set and work through strategy to solve problems for customers and others. So I have business experience that nobody has on the select board. Two, I know I've told this before, some of you may have heard it. I came out from Section 8 housing. I was a 17-year-old father. I started out behind I was way behind. And if it wasn't for Section 8 housing, Medicaid, food stamps, and WIC, I wouldn't be sitting before you. Nobody's ever sat on the select board that has that experience. I understand food insecurity, housing insecurity, healthcare insecurity, and what it's like to have to go reclaim your income, recertify your income every few months to make sure that you don't lose those things. So I get it. I've also, as John mentioned, I've had experience. I've been on the advisory committee for 2 years. I was on the school finance subcommittee. I was on the zoning and land use subcommittee. I've been in town meeting for 4 years. I'm not shy about tackling the very sticky issues. I've been very good at it, and I've worked very collaborative, and the reason why I get things done is because I find common ground. And then lastly, I'm out of time. I'm just going to say I am a public school parent. Amy and I are full supporters, and I look forward to joining Miriam on the select board to make sure that we have a continued voice for its children. Thank you.
All right,
Sorry.
that's fine.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I'm just going to give you my closing statement, but you can keep asking questions after I'm done. That's exactly what I was going to say. If you elect me to the select board, here's what I will accomplish for you: a broader tax base and additional sources to increase revenues and decrease our structural deficit. Transparency and accountability to the budget process, as well as prudent fiscal oversight. Proactive climate policy to reach our sustainability goals. Affordable rents and support for our thriving businesses to ensure that they remain thriving. Evaluating our town-school partnership and ensuring that all stakeholders' interests are met. And last but not least, problem-solving our affordability crisis through careful, detailed evaluation of our housing and business models and how we can prioritize municipal policies that foster a sustainable financial future for Brookline and for all of you. On May 2nd, we, the voters of Brookline, have a decision to make. I got in this race so that you could have a choice on the select board. Without me, the election would have remained uncontested for the second year in a row. I will be a leader who can make executive decisions that support business growth, equitable priorities, and proactive policies, but more importantly, will bring Brookline in the direction that you want. So, if you're ready for a change, then vote for me, Arden Reamer, on May 2nd, and I will get to work for you.
Thanks, Arden. So I think we had 2 more questions. One is over there and one over here. I think we should have plenty of time for both, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, my name is John Harris. I'm a town meeting member. I'm also a long-term co-chair of a group called Climate Action Brookline. We work on climate issues. Would love to have anybody who would like to work with us to join us. My question is related to seniors and climate. Although today's seniors, unfortunately, the passage of time indicates that the worst effects of rising temperatures, they will not personally suffer. Their children and grandchildren definitely will suffer the effects of those. That being the case, what specific climate activities, initiatives, whatever, do you think Brookline seniors could engage in, given time limitations, energy limitations, and fiscal limitations for many? And how would you mobilize and inspire Brookline seniors to contribute to climate solutions? Thank you.
Thanks, and Paul, you're going to be up first for that one.
Sure. So, John, thank you for your question, and thank you for your work chairing Climate Action Brookline. So, he asked a lot of questions. I'm going to try to make sure I stay true to it. You know, for me, the select board in the town, everything that we do, every activity, every planning activity, every budget activity, every time a board and commission meets, when we plan on purchasing something, when we plan on building something, when we plan on modifying a park, modifying a road, we should incorporate the climate crisis and how we can respond at that moment. That includes for seniors, it includes for people that are in the middle, that are younger, it includes everybody, commercial, residential. So we need to take advantage of the moment when we can do that. Specifically, John's question about what can seniors do now? Well, if you are in the process of perhaps changing your home, if you're finding that you need a new heating system, you should move to electricity, and you should consult with the town, you should consult with Mothers Out Front and John to find out what's the best method to do that. Everybody needs to take the opportunity when something is happening, change is happening. We need to embrace the opportunity to move off of fossil fuels. So I would encourage everybody to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Arden.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have been attending the Mothers Out Front climate action calls, and we have been talking about climate justice. And that is absolutely something that impacts our seniors here in Brookline. It's a very important issue. We are in a heat desert. Those of us who live in the Coolidge Corner area, in moderate income areas here in Brookline, are affected by climate justice. So we need to think about how do we look at our urban canopy, how can we make sure that we have a strategic plan with that and that it's prioritized by your needs and what you're thinking about in terms of solving our climate crisis. And that is on our debt exclusion, our operating override. And we also need to talk about how can we lower the price of electricity for all of you, especially if you're going to start thinking about converting. The Select Board recently approved something called the PACE loan program, and that is something that where once it comes into action, where commercial properties, residential buildings, and nonprofits can take out loans so that they can begin to convert and electrify, because that's the biggest expense of electrification. And we need to think about how we can solve this climate crisis, but so that it works for all of us. So if we're going to meet these goals of net zero by 2040 and 50% reduction by 2030, and that's Brookline's goal, we need to make sure it's affordable for all of us.
Thanks, Arden. John.
I love this question, and I'm going to differentiate myself one more time from the two other candidates at this table. I do not hesitate to self-identify myself as a senior, and actually I think we all prefer the term older adults. That's who I am. And what I love about John's question is, to me, the answer is we care about the climate and the future of the planet because we are seniors. To put it bluntly, we don't have as much time left as our children do and as our grandchildren do. And when the time comes, we want to be able to say to ourselves, we did what we could so that this planet would be a thriving, healthy planet for our children and our grandchildren. So just being a senior is motivation enough. Another thing we know is that you are not at the end of your useful life at age 50, okay? 50 years is not the end of a useful life. Another thing we know is there's virtue in making things last, okay? I'd like to see us practice that virtue a little bit more and find ways to look around us, figure out ways through adaptive reuse and preservation to make things last. That's a good habit to teach our children, and I think that's one that seniors especially can teach their children and their grandchildren.
Thanks, John. So last question right here in the front. Thank you very much, Jamie.
Hi, Regina Frawley from Precinct 16, what I refer to as the forgotten corner of Brookline. There's a policy, we often compare ourselves to Newton, and their policy in Newton about schools is they do not build new unless it's completely no other choice. And they just voted down an override for a new school, and they've taken the money and they're doing rehab and addition. I've been in some of the schools, they've done that policy, and they're gorgeous, and they're state of the art in terms of everything you would need in a school. Having said that, why are we not ever discussing that policy, number one? And number two, John, you just voted, and I wonder what the other two candidates would do for a $500,000 terrazzo floor at the Driscoll School to replace the existing one. Do you think that's the way to do the taxpayer dollar to keep costs down? What would you do, the other two candidates? And John, why did you vote for that? Thank you.
And Arden, you're up first.
Let me try to answer that for you, John. No, it's absolutely not a laughing matter. It's very serious. And these expenses, this is exactly what I was talking about priorities. This is where we need to find out from you what your priorities are. Obviously, a terrazzo floor at the Driscoll School is not the way you would value spending your money. And I absolutely understand that. And that's why it is important that we understand what your priorities are, especially if this debt exclusion does pass here in Brookline, because that is a possibility. So we need to make sure that you're represented on the building committee should the debt exclusion pass. And if it doesn't, we need to find out what your priorities are so that we can be fiscally responsible and transparent with every bit of budgeting that we are doing in this town. Because I think that's really what you're talking about, is that there was a lack of transparency, that we were not being fiscally responsible, and decisions were made and you were not at the table to make them. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. John.
So, Regina, I do thank you for asking that question. And the answer to that question is that it's not so much that the select board voted by choice to put an $86 per square foot, that's what it cost, terrazzo floor in the Driscoll School. The select board was presented with the fact that there had been a change in the price of the terrazzo floor, and it had already been approved by the building commission, and it had already been approved by the school building committee. And basically what we did was the responsible thing, which was to vote to pay our bills. And that's another thing that I'm going to say seniors are good. That's a lesson they're good at teaching, is there's a value to always paying your bills. And that's why a lot of seniors aren't comfortable with borrowing a lot of money. And if we don't know how we're going to pay for that borrowing. And so we did it for a reason. One more quick note. We were told by the school committee representative that this would prove its value. And she may be right, because, as she said, terrazzo can last for 80 or 90 years. And I immediately thought to myself, what good is that if we tear down a school building after 50 years? So think about that, and also think about the tile in this room. Does that look like terrazzo? I don't think so. And the senior center has had to struggle for every penny of repainting, retiling, and to keep this building looking just as good as it does now, but it doesn't look like an $86 a square foot building, I'll tell you that much.
Thanks, John. Paul.
Hi, Regina. Thank you for your question. I'm going to try to answer it directly. So about whether we should have a policy of not tearing anything down and just refurbishing it, I don't know if, I can't say a blanket policy like that makes sense for us. I do know that the Pierce School, which was designed, it's poured concrete. There's no spaces between the walls. There's no space to modify it or reconfigure it. That poured concrete was poured to be in line with an educational philosophy, and it's inflexible. And I believe the building needs to be torn down. With respect to terrazzo flooring, I do think that there was probably a discussion, I know there was a discussion about the financial benefits of not having to replace a floor for 80 years. But personally for me, Regina, I think the higher upfront costs, which was borne by the taxpayers today, was not worth it, and I would not have supported that change. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for taking so many questions. A couple of topics that were submitted that we didn't get to: urban canopy, compost, MBTA shelters. So just shouting out some other topics that we might have gotten to if we had more time. We're going to go to closing statements. We'll continue with our order rotation. So John, you first, 2 minutes each for closing statements.
Thanks very much. Is this working? Yeah, sure it is. So thank you all for coming today, and those of you who I hope will vote for me to have another term on the select board, thank you very much for that. I know I've got a lot of gas in my tank, and I know that I have got a lot of ideas and a lot of energy to bring to the select board. And I know that the best is yet to come as far as I'm concerned. I want my second term to be better than my first, even better than my first. I also want to say a word which I owe to John Harris. I promised him I would get in this explanation. Conveniently, it's time for me to tell who I am endorsed by. And in fact, that is Brookline by Design has endorsed me. Brookline PACS has endorsed me. And Climate Forward Brookline has endorsed me, not to be confused with John Harris's organization, Climate Action Brookline. So you will see that on my postcards and on my website. I'm very, very proud of it for the reasons I mentioned. I think thinking about the future of the planet is a good way to approach just about every problem that we face on the select board. And to have been the select board member, the select board incumbent, who gets recognized for leadership in addressing the issues that are core to the future of this very planet, something I'm very proud of, something I am going to be sure to tell my kids about, and I already have. I like to point to it and say, you know, your dad may not be on top of every issue as far as you're concerned, but he learned quickly when it came to climate change, and he's doing what he can. I want to continue to do what I can on that. I want to continue to be the person on the select board who, more than any other person on the select board, says, why are we spending this money? I'm not afraid to say I'm a person who doesn't like to spend money. I just finished this afternoon being led to Marathon Sports to get a new pair of shoes by my kids, because they saw my shoes and they said, only if we take him to a store is he going to get a new pair of shoes. I treat your money the way I treat my shoes. I want it spent wisely, and I want you to get full value for every dollar spent. And I hope you'll vote for me on May 2nd.
Thank you, John. Paul.
Yes, thank you. So I'm not going to repeat my earlier answer about what differentiates me. I think I don't want to repeat that. I want to mention the endorsements as well. I am endorsed by Brookline by Design and PACS, and I also am the only candidate that's endorsed by the Firefighters Union, the Police Union, and the Municipal Employees Union. And I'm very pleased to have those endorsements. The reason why I know to fight scooters that are being left on sidewalks is because I have empathy for seniors. The reason why I know that I need to spend time with Todd Corain and Erin Galantine trying to fix the audible signal because my neighbor's blind and he can't cross the street to get to Trader Joe's is because I have empathy for seniors. You know, my mother lived with me for 12 years. In her ending years of her life, she moved back to Arlington and went into senior low-income housing. The reason why she could do that was because Arlington had a preference for local, if you were a resident, you got to go into housing. You know, I was with her the last few days of her life. I held her hand when she took her last breath. Parking mattered to her so that hospice could come and visit her. Parking mattered to her so that when they were coming to deliver food and medicine to her, they could park and come up. My life experience informs everything that I do on this, at anything and everything. And my experience with my mother as she aged and what it meant to be valued and cared for and respected is something that I will bring to the select board for our senior population. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And hold till the end, and Arden.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Michael Allen. You did a fabulous job, and I really appreciate you moderating for us today. I'd like to thank Matt Weiss, spectacular timekeeper, even though I didn't always follow the rules. But most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for turning up today. This is 2 hours out of your lives to come here to make a very important decision for this town. And I understand because I love this town dearly. I have lived here my whole life. My mother lives here. She's an older person. My kids are here. One's at Brookline High and one's at the Ruff and Ridley School. My little fluff baby Oreo is here. But I am invested in this town, and that is why I decided to run for select board, because I want to be here to represent my mother, my kids, and most of all of you. And I am going to listen to you. I'm going to hear what you have to say to me, and I am going to be your leader. When I worked on Beacon Hill in a bipartisan government, managing the public safety budget, I cared about stakeholders' interests. I went out and I visited those folks, the police department, the state police, the Department of Corrections, and I wanted to hear what they had to say, what they were interested in for their budgets, and I care about that for all of you. So I hope that when you show up on May 2nd or vote ahead of time, you will consider me and think about voting for me, because I care about all of you and this town of Brookline, and I want to step up and be a leader for you. Thank you.
Thank you all. And now you guys can go for it. And just as we wrap up, it's a difficult thing to run for office. It's a difficult thing to put yourself out there. Thank you all for doing that and spending so much time with us. Thanks to Matt for keeping time. Brookline Can, League of Women Voters, Big, Jamie for the question help. Thanks, everybody. Oh, and Ben, yes, and the town clerk for showing up, and the school committee members for being here.
I got those.
Have a good night, everybody.